had somebody come and ask you, hey, will you do me a favor? And you say yes, and you really don't even know what they're asking at the time, and you find out there are all these stipulations to it that you weren't expecting, but you still said yes. And I had that happen to me in one of those God moments where this opportunity to come to Guatemala took place, and I said yes, and I thought, well, I'm gonna go one time. It's gonna be a one and done, see the country, do a mission trip, bless the people, all that stuff. And little did I know in 2007 when I came the first time that it was going to be a journey of 14 years now, that I've been coming down here multiple times a year, working in Guatemala, and what I thought was just going to be a one-time trip has become a passion for me. And God sent me, and I said yes, and I wasn't expecting all these things to take place. And what it meant for us was, it wasn't just coming and doing a mission trip. We stumbled onto things like doing a medical clinic, and then VBS, and then planting churches. And right now, I'm on top of a church that we planted here in Los Pinos, and you can see the community behind me, and we just have this passion. There are people working all around us right now, even while I speak. And I did not think God would do that He would bring me this place and to build these relationships and stuff. I just said yes. And when you say yes to God, it means so many things. He does so much in your life. Like, for example, I said yes to God when I was 16 and said, I'll serve, I'll go into the ministry, I'll do whatever you want me to do. And it led to 30-some years in youth ministry. But then all of a sudden He called me to plant a church. And I never wanted to plant a church, never thought I'd plant a church, and now 9 years later, I'm passionate about planting churches. And it's one of those things when we say yes to God, churches get planted and lives get changed. And man, God does things in your life like cause you to be more in love with Jesus and more in love with people. And then and out of that, when you do those things, you become an impact maker and begin to make a difference in the world around you. But it all begins with saying yes. And so we're going to look today at a guy that said yes, not even knowing what God was going to ask him to do, what God was going to do. He just said yes. And we find this in Isaiah chapter 6 where it says, then I heard the voice of the Lord asking, who will I send? Who will go for me? And Isaiah heard that and he goes, here am I, send me. I'll go. I'll do whatever you want me to do, Lord. I'll go wherever you want me to go. And we're talking in this series about dangerous prayers, and that is a dangerous prayer when you say send me, because when you say send me, God may interrupt your comfortable world back in the States where you got everything planned out and you're planning for your retirement and you got your 401k taken care of and all that stuff, and all of a sudden God says, I want you to go somewhere else. Now, probably the most dangerous prayer that you will ever pray is send me, but it's also the most defining prayer that you will ever pray outside of asking Jesus to save you. Say, God, what is it you created me for? What is my mission? And so I was going to give you the backstory of what took place there. It says in the beginning in Isaiah 6:1, it says, in the year that King Uzziah died. And we read that as Americans, we kind of gloss over it. But King Uzziah was a good king in a period where there were some really bad kings. And there was stability and economic stability, and the enemies of the state were held off, and all of a sudden he dies, and there was chaos that came in and uncertainty. Nobody knew what was going to happen with the economy, and now all these enemies were pressing in from all around him. And so Isaiah is absolutely mortified and distraught because Uzziah died, and the people were as well. And I think when you look at that, you can look at what's going on in America and around the world today, and there's chaos and there's uncertainty. We live in the same period, the same type things going on now that Isaiah dealt with, and so you kind of understand what's going on. And it goes on and says that it said, I saw the Lord seated high in a lofty throne, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. So Isaiah had gone into the temple to pray, which he did on a regular basis. But on this time, it was unlike any other because God showed up. Man, wouldn't that be great right now on YouTube or in our worship services, God showed up. And Isaiah wasn't expecting it, though. Every time we go into worship, we should expect God to show up because He wants to. And He says that God showed up, and it says the seraphim were standing above Him. They each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of armies. His glory fills the whole earth. The foundations of the doorway shook, and the sound of their voices, and the temple was filled with smoke. And I don't know if you can even begin to wrap your mind around it. I mean, just can you even imagine what that was like? I mean, we go to church every week. Could you imagine if you were there one week and God's glory actually showed up? what would you do? Because we sit there and go, you know, Jesus, I want to see you. We sing songs about it. But I will tell you, when his glory showed up, Isaiah shrunk back. When his glory showed up, Isaiah couldn't stand what he saw because it was so incredibly awesome. And it says here in the Bible, says, then he said, woe is me, for I'm ruined, because I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, because my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of armies. That unlike us, we think when God shows up that we're going to stand up before him and somehow it's God's privilege to see us. No. When God shows up, the proper thing is to fall flat on your face because God's there. And you see it all through Scripture. You see in the New Testament, there's a story where Peter, James, and John are up on a mountaintop with Jesus, and Moses and Elijah show up, and they see Jesus in a glorified body. And at first they sit there and go, hey, let's build a temple to Elijah, let's build a temple to Moses, let's build one to you, Jesus. And then it says the voice of the Lord showed up, and they fell flat on their face. Man, the glory of God floored them. You see that when Paul was on the Damascus road and he's sitting there going, he sees this bright light, and it says when Jesus spoke, he fell down on his face. And that's what happens when God showed up. That's what happened to Isaiah. God showed up, and it absolutely blew him away. And it says, then one of the seraphim flew to me, and in his hand was a glowing coal they had taken from the altar with tongs. And he touched my mouth and said, now that this has touched your lips, your iniquity is removed, your sin is atoned for. And when God shows up, we realize how bad we are, how sinful we are, how messed up we are, how our thoughts are not his thoughts. And then Jesus does this incredible thing. He cleanses and purifies. In fact, 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, he who knew no sin became sin for you, for me, so that we might be the righteousness of God. God takes away our sin, and he makes us something totally different that's now usable. And that's what happened to Isaiah. God touched his tongue with coals and cleansed him so that now he could be used in a new way. And then that's when God looked at him and said, who will I send? Who will go for me? That's an incredible question. Who I'll send? I mean, we live in a world where I'm in Guatemala right now, and man, there's such need here. There's such need for people to come and minister here. Such need for people to come along and partner with the Guatemalan church, with our brothers and sisters, building buildings and helping them with stuff they can't afford so they can then go do the things they can't afford, ministering to people. Right below us is a clinic that's run by Guatemalans that minister to the needs of all this community here medically. That's run by the church, so people from this community come, but this was built by people from Alabama. This church that is right next door that we're up against is built by people from Mission Serve. And so when God says, who will I send, who will go for me, he's calling you, he's calling me. He's not necessarily calling us all to Guatemala, but he's calling us to do something. And Isaiah's response was when he saw the Lord and God cleansed him, was to say, send me, I will go. I will go. My question for you is, when you sit there and God's calling, saying who, and the who is you, are you willing to go? And I think in the American church we have this idea, it's the pastor who goes, or it's the super saints, or those who have a lot of money who go. And the truth is, it's all of us. Paul writes it this way in 2 Corinthians 5:20, he says, therefore we are ambassadors of Christ, since God is making his appeal through us. We plead on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. In other words, God's given you the task, the job of being his ambassador. He's given you the task of speaking from an ambassador when in a country speaks for the country he represents. And God has given you that task to represent him on this earth, him in this world right now. And so we have these, God has this dream for this world to know him, but we have our dreams to be comfortable. We have our dreams to have our stuff. And someday when we're older, we'll serve him. But I've learned a couple things. One, someday may never come. If you put someday. And for some of you, someday is today. God says, who I'll send, who will go for me. It says in Ephesians 5, or Ephesians 2:10, it says this, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus, do the things he prepared for us in advance. I mean, you got to wrap your mind around that. But God created you to do something like this. When God called me to come down here, God knew 14 years ago that I would be right here, right now, preaching this sermon on top of this church. And for this moment, for right now, these 20 minutes, this is God's plan for me. This is God's call for me. And it all started with me years ago saying, here am I, send me. Now, years ago, I didn't think I'd be up on top of a roof doing this. but God's going to use it. And so you sit there and go, well, I can't afford to go to Guatemala. I'm too old to go to Guatemala. God can't send me. Well, let me just give you this. So there are 7 domains that we all live in. And God sends us, maybe not to Guatemala, but He sends you to one of those 7 domains, or maybe 2 or 3 of those domains. And here they are. There's the arts and entertainment. These are like people who are artistic or sing or have some sort of ability. That's one of the domains. There's the business domain. You work in a company and you're in that business domain. That's where you live. That's where God's placed you. There's the education domain. You may be a teacher, or you may be a student, or you may be a tutor, that you live in that educational domain. Or there's the government. Maybe you work for a government agency and you've got that domain. Or maybe you hold an elective office and you are in that domain. There's the family domain that we're all in. We all live in that. We have brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, children, spouses, that we live in that domain. There's the media domain, and in particular right now, social media. The coolest thing about social media is I keep in touch with these Guatemalan friends of mine all the time through social media, and they keep in touch with me. Then there's the religious domain, and for most of us believers, we think everything has to happen in the religious domain. But I'm going to tell you that if you're in arts and entertainment, you should sing your best for the Lord. And you should make sure in that domain that you represent Jesus well. If you're in the business domain, you should be the best employee, best employer. You should be the person who takes care of people, ministers to people, and then as the opportunity arises, tell them about Jesus. If you're in the government domain, man, you should lead in a way that brings honor to Jesus. You should be sharing Jesus every opportunity you get with people. In the family domain, we all live there, and so we should all be making sure that all of our family members one day are with us in heaven. If it's the education domain, if you're a student, man, share Jesus with your friends. If you're a teacher, live out your faith in front of people all the time. Don't just relegate yourself to thinking that the only domain you have is religion, and that's just Sunday mornings and you go and do something else. No, Sunday morning is to get you ready for the rest of the week. It's to get you ready to live out the truth in the domain that you live in, whether it's business or education or family or wherever it is you live. And so I just want to ask you this question, because I believe God calls all of us. He's called you. He's called me. And so if He's called us, what has been your response? Has your response been, someday I'll go, someday I'll do this, someday I'll impact a country like Guatemala, someday I'll impact my business? Is that what you said? Because, delayed obedience is disobedience. I mean, with my children, when I say, hey, go empty the dishwasher, and they would go, I'll do it, and then 3 days later, still not done. They may have every intention of doing it. Guess what? From my perspective, that's disobedience. And when God has said, who I'll send, who will go for me, and you're an ambassador for Jesus Christ, He created you to do things in advance, and you say, someday I'll go, that's disobedience. So what's your response when God says, who I'll send and who will go for me? I hope it's here, my send me. Now understand this, when you it's a dangerous prayer, because when you do that, God is going to interrupt your comfortable, everyday, ordinary life and do something great. And I can tell you from my perspective, I am so thankful that I said yes. I'm thankful these 14 years. I would not trade this time for anything. I would not trade any of the yeses I've given God for anything. And so I want you to watch as we close up. I want you to watch. This is one of my friends who came down here that God interrupted his everyday life. His name's Matt Smith. He comes down here and leads on this project. Has ministered to thousands and thousands of people over the last 9 years or so. And I want you to hear his testimony. And I want you at the end of this to go, God, here am I. Send me.
My name is Matt Smith, for those of you who don't know me. In 2008, 2009, my wife and I were looking for a place where we could do missions, both local, we live in North Carolina, and abroad. I had grown up as a missionary kid in South America, speak Spanish fluently, and so we were looking for somewhere where we could come into somewhere that spoke Spanish. Met Joe. A week later, we were in Guatemala City, and I came working as a plumber. So we worked there, and then in 2011, we came back, and Joe had met a translator, and the translator had said that we needed to come to her city, her town to work, and that was Jalapa. And the plan once again was I was going to be in construction. Met a young guy who was a doctor here. His father is one of the pastors in the big churches in Guatemala City. And he told me that he was going to be doing a medical clinic and asked me to come work with him. I'm an emergency room physician assistant in the United States. And I tried to use all kinds of excuses. I couldn't work here because I didn't have a license, which he was able to show me that through reciprocity I would be allowed to work here. Well, then I couldn't treat because I didn't know what to treat. I didn't know how to treat diseases in this area. And he told me, well, come with me and I'll show you how to do that. So went with him. We saw a couple hundred people. We ended up writing their names on little sticky notes and writing down the medicines they would need. So then I asked him, well, David, how are these people going to afford these? And he said, well, they're probably not going to. So that first week we went and bought some things and gave some that we had away. And slowly started thinking, and as we came down every 6 months, we expanded and expanded to where now we were able to see upwards of 1,500 people in a 4-day clinic that we run. We provide all their medications, we provide reading glasses, we provide blood pressure medications, diabetes medications, medications, vitamins, skin infections. We've even done removed toenails and sewn up lacerations. The very poorest of the population here, they actually live in the dump. They make enough money to be able to buy food and water by sifting through the trash in the dump and taking out recyclables and then selling those to the gentleman who owns. And they actually live in little lean-tos of the whatever plastic piece or cardboard piece that they can get. And so we're going to be going in and giving out vitamins and different medications that we have into that area. We've also gone into the community here, up into their homes, and done home visits, and just provided all the medication and vitamins for those visits as well. The act of saying yes, that I would come to do a mission thing, and my thought was that I'd be doing construction to what it's come to today, to the point that I've actually started a nonprofit organization called Outlook Mountain Mission Incorporated, and the idea is to help the church here fund to run a clinic so that the local people can get medical care that they need and that they can afford. All the medications and the consultations are all provided free of charge. So it's just neat seeing where it's come to today, where God has opened doors and moved it to where now we're able to come down here and help the churches reach into areas where they haven't been before to help local populations with medical care. And then, the exciting thing of going on now to where we're actually going to help them build an actual brick and mortar clinic that is there 365 days a year and offers medical care in those areas. So you never know, when you say, yes, Lord, I'll go, here am I, send me, where it can go from there. It's amazing.